Hello and welcome to The Edition. I'm your host, Charlotte Henry. I'm really excited this week to get to talk to my guest. It's someone whose work I've enjoyed and admired for a long time. It's Joey D'Urso, who's now the senior data reporter at the Times and the Sunday Times. You've done a bunch of interesting jobs and wrote a very interesting book. So we'll get to all of that as well in a bit. But first of all, how are you, Joe? It's great to see you.
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
No, I'm thrilled. So I guess we should do a bit of Joey D'Urso 101. Take us through, because you've been at the BBC, you had a fascinating gig at The Athletic, and now you're back in print in the Times and the Sunday Times. So just explain a little bit about yourself for readers who haven't been lucky enough to come across your work yet.
So I guess I started all this about a decade ago. My first job was at Reuters, did that for a year. Then I joined the BBC in the politics department just after Brexit.
A nice quiet time to get in to join a politics team.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I sort of thought I'd missed all the drama because I wasn't there for the referendum. I joined in September 2016.
How wrong you were!
Yeah, 2 general elections, American election, all sorts of things. Yeah, it was fun. And then I stepped away from that. I mean, I actually joined BuzzFeed, which was a complete disaster. That
yes,
imploded about 2 months after me joining.
Yes, I remember you talking about joining them.
Yeah, it was great, but I mean, COVID and that didn't work. But and I had a sort of summer of 2020 floundering about, not knowing what I was doing, and then The Athletic came along.
Didn't we all that summer?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was pretty stressful to be honest. But then The Athletic, it was great. Did that for three and a half years. Owned by the New York Times. Did some investigations into the murky world of football, which inspired this book that I've just released. And then I joined the Times just about 18 months ago now. Senior data journalist.
So tell me a bit about. I was really interested in your work at The Athletic because it was sports reporting, but sort of not. It looked at the world behind sport, which I found really interesting. Tell me how you got into that and how you looked at that kind of world.
Yeah, so I was basically hired as the investigations reporter, which was a pretty kind of open-ended job. It was, I could kind of do with it what I wanted, which is on the one hand really exciting, and journalists, it's great to have the freedom, but it's a bit terrifying because there isn't a sort of beat, there isn't a regular press conference to attend or match to write about. But one thing I eventually started doing a lot on was shirt sponsors and some of these incredibly shady companies advertising to Chinese gamblers, which would be all over the Premier League shirts, Premier League billboards, really shady companies based in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, the Philippines, which often we had pretty clear links to organised crime. And I sort of dug this up by, spending a lot of time on the phone, spending a lot of time looking at sort of cryptocurrency and murky online trails in the pandemic, and wrote some big stories. And also a lot on cryptocurrency itself, which is another source of extremely shady cash at the top of English and global football.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm a big football fan, and we used to, like you, I'm a big football fan, and we'd look at these shirt sponsors and be like, who on earth is that?
Yeah, it's a common feeling for football fans.
Never heard of this brand, and then you were sort of unpacking who they were. And how did that lead into your book?
Yeah, so a couple of the chapters in the book are about that sort of work that I've done. I mean, more than a shirt, how football shirts explain global politics, money and power is the shtick. I mean, and part of it is through those kind of murky paper trails, but part of it are maybe stories that are a bit more obvious, a bit more in your face. If you think about Manchester City being sponsored by Etihad, which is the airline of Abu Dhabi, Arsenal, Real Madrid and all sorts of other teams with Fly Emirates, the airline of Dubai. And Newcastle United playing in the green of the Saudi Arabian flag. So wherever you look now, I think this link between politics and football is really intertwined. And it's quite hard to be a fan of one and not the other these days. I mean, even if you're just a football fan, who likes going to the game, I put myself in that category. But you can't completely bury your head in the sand from the things when Qatar is hosting the World Cup, when Saudi Arabia is hosting the World Cup, when Donald Trump is going to be all over the next World Cup next year. And at the same time,
he can't wait.
He loves it. He's got the Club World Cup trophy in his room. Infantino's his new best friend.
FIFA have invented a peace prize for Donald Trump, haven't they?
Yeah, well, yeah. No, I think they've not awarded it yet. It's a peace prize.
Sorry, are we meant to pretend to be surprised? Sorry, mate.
I think it's all a very competitive prize with a very transparent application process, I'm sure.
What interests me and why I've always enjoyed your work, and your answers just kind of outlined it, is there is space for journalism now, isn't there? Where we look at the layer under the layer, whether it's politics, whether it's, as you've done in sport, as you're doing now, the data underlining stories at the Times and Sunday Times. We can have a sort of different way of looking at things that is quite important for journalists to do, I think.
Yeah, you're right. And I think football fans, there's always been links between football and politics, but I think it's just so much more in your face now. And also, there's the other way around. I mean, I've had conversations with friends who are really interested in politics who aren't particularly football fans. But again, that's kind of so in your face now that when the World Cup is such a big part of his identity, when you've got the entire politics of the Middle East are so bound up in football, even for people who aren't football fans, I think there's a sort of curiosity there that people wish to understand more that might not have been there even 10 years ago.
Why is Lionel Messi picking up a World Cup in a Qatari robe, or
a bisht? Yeah.
Yeah. Why is Donald Trump? Well, the famous picture of Donald Trump and Cole Palmer, which we could do a whole show on because it's so incredible, but we won't. And so, tell me more about your work at the Times and Sunday Times.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm senior data journalist. Do data? I mean, it's a very broad job. It can mean anything that involves numbers. That can be NHS waiting lists. That can be small boat arrivals. It can be pretty much anything. And using data skills, using sort of coding or just basic, Excel sheets and Google Sheets to try and uncover stories. What I've been doing recently in the last few weeks, a lot of interesting stuff on vaccines. Really enjoyed doing the two big elections. That was, I wanted to sort of get my ducks in a row to be back out of sport and into general journalism and politics with those two big elections in 2024. I loved all that, looking at sort of precinct level data or constituency data.
Anyone who follows you on Twitter, I don't think that this is disingenuous to say that you are a politics nerd, Joey.
I'll happily take that, yeah. Although I don't really use Twitter anymore. I feel like it's
No, I'm going back in the day from when I first encountered you. I don't think the nerdiness has changed, if you don't mind me saying.
Oh no, still full throttle.
But that is important because often we hear, actually, how many conversations have you and I had with journalists who go, I don't do numbers. I can't do numbers. I've had this conversation with a guest on the show before, James Ball, as well. And there's a growing number of journalists who just go, that want to take in the numbers and the data, whereas previously it was a sort of badge of honour that we as journalists didn't do numbers.
Yeah, and I agree that's not a very helpful way of looking at things. I mean, people wouldn't say, "Oh, I can't do reading." That would be a bit embarrassing.
Certainly in a newsroom.
Yeah, and I think it's like, well, I think it's also like it shouldn't be seen as a kind of binary, like either you're completely innumerate or you're a sort of absolute, Einstein. Like there's a sort of sliding scale, and everyone can do a bit of numbers. Some people more than others, but stuff like just knowing how to do summing things up on a Google Sheets or a pivot table, which sounds quite geeky, but it's really pretty straightforward, and you can get an incredible amount of data journalism out of that. You don't necessarily need to code. And I wouldn't see myself as a particularly proficient coder in terms of writing code, but AI and ChatGPT is really lowering the barrier to entry on all that. And, there's all sorts of concerns about that. It's obviously better to be able to do it all yourself if you can, but if you can't, it's pretty powerful and it's pretty exciting. I think you can just sort of get it to write stuff for you. And if there's an error message, you can get it to fix it for you. And I'm not saying that's a replacement for knowing how to do it all yourself, but I think it really does lower the barrier to entry to doing this kind of work.
Yeah, you've slightly preempted my next question, which is how is AI feeding into all this work? And actually, are we going to get better data-driven journalism because of the growth of AI?
Yeah, so I think it can do. I think there are downsides to it. It can make people lazy. I think
journalists don't need an excuse to be lazy, let's be honest.
Well, exactly. But the sort of errors creeping into work, which is, the worst thing you can do is make a massive mistake in a story. And I think AI makes that way more likely, basically, because it just puts out rubbish. But I think where AI is really useful is for the sort of boring data crunching, which even 2 years ago, I spent a lot of my time like cleaning numbers, and it's incredibly tedious stuff. And now I can just the positive case is that you spend less time doing that and more time like ringing people up and getting out and about and doing the stuff that journalists kind of should be doing.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you on that, and I've written about that before. I mean, there's a downside to it that you might not have the entry-level jobs, which is a different issue.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big issue.
It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
But in terms of journalists of your seniority being able to focus on the big things, not fiddling around cleaning up a horrible CSV spreadsheet that you've downloaded, that's obviously a huge benefit to data, to the AI era that we're in, and is obviously continuing and coming.
Yeah, it certainly saves a lot of time. My worry about it, is for those kind of early career journalists or students who are just kind of using it to almost short circuit like the human brain, which I find pretty terrifying. Like
Or
not
might not
reading
have the
books.
jobs to go into,
Yeah.
where, someone in a team like yours needs someone to, needs a student journalist to clean up the numbers. And that's a great way into a newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that we have really good grad trainees, and I think that the currency, the thing that will impress people always is ideas and original ways of doing things, and at this point, it can't do that. So I think that is always the currency of being a junior journalist is having good ideas, and if you've got good ideas, you'll people will notice you. So it's
Yeah.
not like the junior jobs here aren't sort of data monkeys, but I can see how in certain industries it might really upturn things pretty quickly.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that as well. I'm interested though how you think more broadly we're using data and numbers in journalism, because there has always been a bit of a thing that, in journalism we have the source quote and the sort of someone close to this person said that, and often it's not backed up with numbers. Again, it depends on the beat, it depends on what you're writing about, but I think people now do expect a little bit more and do expect some numbers and some hard data to back up what they're being told in whatever kind of publication.
Yeah, and I think people want it and expect it and appreciate it. And I think the bar has kind of risen. I mean, if I think of football and things like XG or whatever,
Yes.
whatever you think of that, 10 years ago, that would have seemed impossibly obscure and geeky. And now it's kind of part of a conversation in the pub. And I think, hopefully the same
Well, it
is
is with
true.
my team.
Really? Yeah.
The ranting 0.0.
Oh, against Chelsea. Yeah, that was pretty dismal, that. Yeah, but people know about these things, and these things aren't as obscure and as they once were. And I don't know if that's true for the news more broadly, to be honest. I wish it was true.
Do you?
Yeah, well, of course I do, because otherwise, I mean, but I think a lot of people are really switched out of the news, and I also think that it's important to bear in mind that data doesn't always change people's mind. People don't. That's sort of a big thing of the Brexit referendum. People sort of just throw numbers at people and throw facts at people that they'd change their opinion on things, and actually, how people vote is down to all sorts of, how people feel, how things are changing. It's not always numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair way of things. You can't, we saw this again in the Brexit referendum, the sort of anti-Brexit side, the Remain side, threw all sorts of numbers at the wall, but it didn't beat the emotion of the Brexit side.
Yeah, and I think a big mistake there was that a lot of the numbers were, I think the case was pretty clear that Brexit would have a negative effect on the economy. If you introduce barriers to trade, I think that's pretty uncontroversial to say. Other people might say it's still worth it for all sorts of other reasons, control immigration, whatever else. But the Remain side threw really specific numbers, like, oh, this will, 5,000 addition in your household bills, and that's just kind of, you can use those projections to kind of say anything, and people don't trust them, and people don't trust what else you're saying. So I think you need to be really careful in using these numbers that are just kind of basically guesses, and people see through that, I think.
We're recording and publishing this show exactly 2 weeks before the budget. I suspect there's a slight look of dread and panic that's come over your face as I ask you, what's that kind of day like for you in a position and a job like yours?
Well, a completely personal perspective, I don't know if I actually will be that busy, because I do more for the sort of Sunday Times, so the more members of my team will be, frantically putting out charts on the live blog. I've kind of, for better or worse, won't be doing that. But yeah, it's huge, and I think particularly this budget, I think there's a huge feeling that there will be really big consequential tax changes that will affect people's lives in pretty massive ways. And I don't think it's not like that every year, to be honest. There's talks of like a significant income tax rise, which is not in the Labour manifesto and be pretty seismic politically. But yeah, I think that's where, readers really want analysis that tells them how, we do all these tax calculators, we do all these things about how the budget is going to affect you. And lots of organisations do this. I'm not saying it's something kind of particularly original, but it is a huge moment, I think, when people come to the media for something that really affects their daily lives. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the news that doesn't affect your daily, what Donald Trump is doing today, I suppose in an indirect way it might affect your life, but a lot of the news is a bit like that. It's kind of distant, it's remote, whereas the budget is something that, is really different. So I think newsrooms have a lot of responsibility to, give their readers stuff they won't know.
Well, and there's an interesting aspect of that for someone who works predominantly for a Sunday paper, of course, because often what we've seen with budgets before is
So fall apart.
it takes a couple of days for everything to sort of filter through and people to go through people like you to go through the numbers, right?
Yeah. And it's also kind of unpredictable what will stick. The pasty tax from
The infant, yes, for American listeners, go and just Google the pastak. I'm not going to explain it now.
but it can be these really obscure little things can completely blow up.
Yeah. And kind of the joy of working for a Sunday paper actually is you can often be the person that unpacks all of that.
Yeah, you'd hope so, given a few more days to think about things. I suppose the flip side of that is that often someone else will already have said it on a Friday or a Saturday, which can be annoying.
Yes, the worst.
But yeah, it is. Yeah, it's nice to have that little bit of extra time to think about things. I mean, there's all this sort of snap reaction to a budget, which is exhausting, and often the best thing to do is just wait a few hours, and you might get some better stuff in the next day's paper.
Absolutely. We'll come back to all of that, and I want to ask you about life at one of the UK's, if not the world's, most well-known news brands. But I just want to thank this week's sponsor, Clean My Mac. I'm thrilled they're supporting the show. It's a product I know and love, and it's helped me keep my machines running smoothly for a number of years now. Clean My Mac is your ultimate solution for Mac control and care, notarized by Apple and meticulously crafted by MacPaw, a leading macOS and iOS software development company. It was featured in the Mac App Store shortlist of the best 25 apps for 2025, and as I say, it's a particular favourite of mine to keep my machines on the road. Clean My Mac has a new cloud cleanup feature that connects to your accounts on iCloud, OneDrive and Google Drive. It scans the cloud to find large space wasters, synced and unsynced files, both in cloud storage and on device. All the scanning happens locally on your Mac, so your data stays safe. To use this fantastic new feature, all you need is to be logged in on the corresponding service's desktop application on your Mac. Then you can remove the files from your disk or evict them solely from the cloud storage, which instantly frees you up some gigabytes. And then if you change your mind, you can restore the files back. Paying attention to your cloud storage is beneficial both for your mental health and wallet. So get rid of those files that are weighing you down. Get tidy today. Try 7 days free and use my code EDITION for 20% off at clnmy.com/theedition. That is clnmy.com/theedition. And thanks to Clean My Mac for sponsoring this show. So, Joey, talk to me about what it's like when you've been at the BBC as well, which is, again, another globally recognised news brand. What's it like being still a relatively young guy walking into those halls and those buildings of these mega brands?
I've been doing it for quite a while now. Maybe you get used to it a bit too quickly. It's exciting, there's all sorts of people who don't enjoy their jobs, find it boring, whatever else. I've certainly never felt that for all these years. So yeah, I feel very, very lucky, very privileged. It's pretty.
Yeah,
cool
there's
job.
definitely you're not doing something right if you have a boring day in journalism.
No, and it's so varied, and people are on the whole really good. I've found in everywhere I've worked, I'd say. Yeah, it's great. It's a privilege, and a lot of people want to do it, and I feel very lucky.
Yeah, it's interesting also, you hinted you're only unfortunate at BuzzFeed a couple of months, you caught the tail end of that. But, there's quite a big difference in that sort of traffic-driven era and that the subscription focus of the Times. I don't know, does it feel nice to have that kind of more direct connection with the readers, perhaps, than as opposed to try to haul people in through Google and whatever else?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of strategy of it all is above my pay grade. But yeah, I mean, it's a way to make money, isn't it? There are people who are tangibly paying money for a product that they're using. And if they're not using it, they'll stop subscribing. But, for the meantime, there are a lot of subscribers. Whereas back in the day of something like BuzzFeed was just purely making money off ads. And then when the ads dried up in COVID, the kind of bottom fell out of everything. So It does feel more stable and more tangible than other methods of paying for news.
Yeah, I always laugh about this in journalism because and in so many parts of the media, like we're going so back to the future in so many ways, right? People are wanting streaming services bundled together, and then
TV.
It sounds a bit like cable TV to me. People are going, "Oh, I just want to pay a set amount and know I can have access to this product." Sounds a bit like a newspaper subscription.
Yeah.
These kind of things always make me laugh. And in terms of how Do you think we can use data more across journalism? Because I still think newsrooms, there are not many equivalents of you, right? There are lots of newsrooms that are slightly underusing the capabilities, I think. I know I did a few shifts years ago on the Guardian's data desk, and they took it very seriously for a long time. But I get the sense still actually in journalism, at a number of publications, data and the ways we can unpack these things now and the stories it can tell is actually being somewhat still underutilized. I know you can't comment on other newsrooms particularly, but within the industry, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's changing quite quickly. I think there's more of. I think there's also sort of two types of. There's the big, massive projects, and then there's like sticking a little bar chart in a random story, which I think is really important and helps to illustrate things and helps people to understand things. And they don't need to be complicated charts. And often the best charts are the really simple ones. We sort of say if you can't understand it within 3 seconds, then make another chart.
Do something
so
different.
I think, yeah. So I think it's that idea of data journalism, not something that's this kind of separate team that sits on another floor and comes up with one story a month. It's just something that is constantly. And, we have software that's pretty easy to use, and other parts of the organisation will just make a quick, particularly for like the money team doing a stock going up or down. They could, and then we do the sort of more advanced stuff. But yeah, I think. Yeah, it just should be sort of plugged into everything. And I think it kind of, if you look at the FT, the BBC, the Guardian, there's a lot of it about now.
Yeah, I still think sometimes I sort of go back to my earlier point. I still think there is a slight nervousness from a lot of journalists. I mean, I'm including myself in this, frankly. I'm always scared of putting a number in a story and getting it wrong, right? Because...
Of course, yeah. I mean, so you should be, right? It's because...
it's probably... maybe it's a good thing. But there's something even more, swapping 1 million for 1 billion, or just doing the calculation wrong.
We've all been there, yeah.
Horrific. I still have cold sweats about it. But those kind of moments are pretty terrible. But there is so much data, available now. Just the other day, I went onto the government's transparency website just on the small boat crossings because people were talking about it. So I wanted to see what the actual numbers are. Do you think governments and public bodies are actually getting better at giving us that transparency data and getting the reality out there?
Yeah, I mean, well, the government will always try and conceal stuff it wants to hide. And that's, we have freedom of information laws and stuff like that, which are often pretty inadequate. I mean, there is a lot of data out there. And I think, broadly speaking, gov.uk is a pretty impressive, compared to other countries. You try and find these things sometimes for other countries, and it's really hard. And I think it's quite, if you're a student journalist or to someone earlier in your career, there's all sorts of stories that haven't been told buried in official data sets on government websites. There is so much out there, and it certainly hasn't all been done by the Times or the BBC or anything else. I mean, particularly if you sort of focus in on a local area or something, it's often the best data journalism is combining those numbers with something else, a tip-off, a conversation with someone, an insight that comes from just talking to people, rather than solely just, making charts out of numbers and public databases.
That's a really interesting point. So, because when people hear data journalism, they kind of think of Nate Silver going through a great big data set, making a chart or a spreadsheet or a few and writing about it. And that's fine. That is a great way to do data journalism. But actually, I really like what you just said there, because it's a sort of indication combining sort of old school journalism with the modern tools and capabilities that we have to comb through this stuff much more quickly and succinctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be a way of kind of enhancing stories that are already being told. And it's certainly not a replacement for standard reporting and talking to people and court reporting and all these other things. I think it can just be made a layer on top of those to tell a story in more detail and more depth.
Yeah, having a source say you might want to look at these numbers or, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and a lot of also data doesn't come from government websites. It might come from stuff that come from companies or
absolutely
all sorts of places.
Yeah, I mean, corporate data actually, in some ways, is almost even more important than government data and even harder to get to.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's harder to get to. Well, sometimes they share it willingly. Companies who want to tell a particular story about something, you've always got to be careful with that. Why is someone pushing this line? But, lots of companies are willing to share, but often it's a kind of, there's nothing sort of unethical about it. It's like those guys want to share something that's interesting, and in exchange you quote them, and that's all above board. So I think that there is lots of data in other ways than just downloading them off gov.uk.
For sure. And I think that actually, we've mentioned young journalists a few times. Digging out some of those things and sort of working their way through it is a good way to impress prospective employers or actually build quite interesting solo projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had all sorts of conversation with student journalists who were starting out, and one thing I always kind of say is like, think about what that I don't, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, but someone lives in some other part of the country and their school has got some problem. I don't know anything about that, but you will know. You'll be the expert. You'll know more than any editor sitting in an office in London. So yeah, and if you can use data to kind of enhance that story, that's always going to, I suppose, impress people.
Yeah, I think that's right. A cheeky question: what interesting things are you looking at the moment that we should keep an eye out for?
I'm still, the football shirts, football sponsorships is something that I'm doing a big thing about football attendances at the moment. I've got lots of data on that and how they sort of plunged in the 70s and 80s and are now completely booming across the board, which is really kind of impressive and exciting, right down to kind of non-league level. And there's just a lot. It's a funny kind of rhythm of the year in journalism is you have obviously the budget, but then the Christmas thing is everyone's trying to desperately commission kind of features and longer things because
so
you have
they don't
basically
have to do any stories over Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And the road, people have gone on holiday, but also there's less news, right? Like the kind of world stops, hopefully. Yeah. I mean, because if there is news, it tends to be like natural disasters and horrible things like
horrific,
that. But,
yeah.
well, it's like, the Pope wishes everyone a Merry Christmas or something. And most people want to be off on like the 28th of December. So in order for that to happen, you have to prepare stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I think a huge part of the news is like, you watch it today, it's Prime Minister's questions. Did Donald Trump give a press conference? He probably does, but it's this sort of daily political stuff or conferences or meetings or events that are happening which aren't happening over Christmas or in the middle of August. So the sort of news year has a kind of rhythm in that sense.
Yeah,
and right now in mid-November, we're sort of everything's going on.
I want you to do some data scraping on how many football teams are using 0% beers as sponsors. Right. As a way of
I think part of the reason that is the Muslim world and Muslim players, and so Paul Pogba.
But also, surely part of it is because alcohol brands are not allowed to. Alcohol is not allowed to advertise on football shirts here, are they?
I think this is right. They're not banned. They've just sort of voluntarily ditched it because it's not a great look with children and whatever else.
Interesting.
But I think it came with Paul Pogba a while ago that he was being asked to advertise a beer, and he pretty reasonably said, my religion, I don't drink beer. And so 0% is a kind of way around that. So it says Heineken all over the stadium, but it says 0% Heineken. But yeah, I went to watch a game in France a while ago and only realised then about my third pint that it was all 0%. So probably for the best.
You only realised when you could realise, once you felt okay.
I felt completely with it. And
what's happened? Interesting. No, it's there's just so many things using these data sets you can get stories from. I just want to finish up actually by saying we've spoken a lot about numbers and for obvious reasons, but in some ways data doesn't have to be numbers, right? We're talking on the day where lots of the Epstein emails have been released. That in itself is a huge, interesting data set that any journalist would want to dig through and unpack stories from using data journalism techniques.
Absolutely, yeah, the 23,000 emails, whatever it was. You're right, it's not just about numbers. There are all sorts of things you can do from... I'm doing something about the radio. I'm a Radiohead fan, and I've pitched a story about the tour happening at the moment, and I'm doing a load of... I suppose it is numbers, but it also doesn't have to be sort of hard, serious news, right? And I think also there's a massive demand at the moment for more fun stuff, culture stuff, sport, lifestyle, because the repeated thing that people always say in every kind of focus group is the news is really depressing, the news is really exhausting, which doesn't mean you should ever stop reporting on the horrible stuff going on in the world, but I think it's also really important that news organisations do a lot else that isn't necessarily miserable, and give people kind of rigorous analysis of things that are a bit more lighthearted.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I write a newsletter on the crossover of culture, media and sport, and I promise I didn't pay Joey to do that little segue. It was that's just how good he is. Where I'm really thrilled I've had you on the show. Where can people keep up with all the work we've been discussing?
On the Times website. They could buy my book if they wished, More Than a Shirt, just in time for Christmas.
There will be a link in the show notes.
Thank you very much. And I'm ditching Twitter, to be honest, but I'm trying to make Instagram happen with limited success, but I've started posting on there more. But
okay,
Twitter,
what's your handle on Instagram?
It's just my name, Joey Durr. So
all right, whenever I go on of that.
X or Twitter these days, it's like someone getting their head kicked in or something. It's a bit terrifying.
Yeah, there are some rather grim moments, but I'm still across Twitter and the rest of social media at Charlotte A. Henry. Of course, head over to theedition.net. You can read blog posts, newsletters, see videos, get podcasts like this. Everything over there at theedition.net. Thank you once again to Clean My Mac for sponsoring the show. Thank you, Joey, for being here. And I'll see you all next week.